today I'd like to start off with a question, which is what all these projects, open source projects, tools, products, however you want to characterize them, what all of them have in common. You have, in case you don't recognize the various logos and icons, you have Kismet, Snort, Zeek, TCP dump, NTOP, Nmap, Wireshark, and Suricata. Now, there are a lot of answers to these questions. They all have, if you're familiar with any of them, they all have something to do with networking and packets and maybe, analyzing them or summarizing them or injecting them or monitoring and alerting or what have you. A lot of them started around the same time, which I'll talk about a little while later on. Sometimes the authors of these tools show up here at SharkFest. For instance, Mike Kershaw, the author of Kismet, is here today. But the thing I want to focus on is that they all make use of libpcap in some way or another. libpcap is the underlying packet capture library that a lot of these tools use to either pull packets off the network or put them onto the network. And by extension, they also, if they have a Windows version, they probably initially used WinPcap, but nowadays they use NPCap. But the fact that they're part of this sort of ecosystem is really useful. Because libpcap, as a person who developed a networking tool, an analyzer, libpcap was great when I was first writing Ethereal, which eventually became Wireshark. One of the very first things I did, I remember when I was writing Ethereal, was to write this little bit of minimum viable code that used libpcap to pull packets off the network. And that was great because once I was able to use libpcap, that meant that I didn't have to go to every operating system that we were going to support and hook into whatever low-level service it had and have to have different code for different operating systems. And I didn't have to worry about talking to network cards or drivers directly. I could just use libpcap and then focus on the features that go into a higher-level analyzer. And as I said in the previous slide, the fact that, WinPcap and now NPCap exist mean that suddenly we can run on Windows and expand our user base, and it's the same with all the other tools. And finally, libpcap has its own file format. If you look at all these tools, you can realize that if you can take a pcap and pivot between all these different tools. You can kind of take a pcap that you took with TCP dump and run it through Snort or NTOP or bring it into Wireshark, which is actually a very common use case. I look at all this and think of what a terrible world it would be if all these tools had different and incompatible file formats. That would kind of stink.
Hurry.
So why do all these tools focus on packets? This is probably a useless slide for this crowd, but to kind of distill it down, packets are truthful, accessible, and reliable. They reflect what your network is doing. I mean, they kind of define what your network is doing. It's one thing to have all this gear plugged in with blinking lights. That's kind of a network, but a real network if you kind of look at it philosophically, the real network are the packets that run on top of it. The real network is the thing that the network is doing, and packet capture reflects that and gives you an insight into that. They're also accessible, meaning you can tap in a number of different locations using a number of different methods and get the data that you want. And they're reliable, meaning that if you set up a tap or something, it's going to stay up and running until the equipment fails, but that's pretty rare. And when you add all this up, you come to a place where this is a really successful thing, and we kind of pop up into popular culture. You can buy a T-shirt that says "PCAP or it didn't happen," and I think one of our sponsors even has hats that say that. I saw a guy with a T-shirt yesterday that said "the packets don't lie." That's another catchphrase that pops up, and I see it pop up in weird places. But I'm focusing on this particular T-shirt right now because you can buy it on Walmart.com and have it shipped to your local Walmart. Which is something I totally, if you had told me that this was going to be the case 25 years ago when I was getting started out, I would have said you were, on something. So you take all this together and it works great. We have this wonderful ecosystem where you can tap into a medium that gives you great insight into what's happening into some very complex systems. So if you look around, you can kind of ask the question, ask how we might duplicate that in other environments and in other kind of arenas. What other sources of truth and accessibility and reliability are there? And, if you look over on the system side, I mean, I know a lot of you work on the network side, and you kind of want to be at arm's length from your system guys, but you got to hug them once in a while. If you look at system calls and logs, you realize that, okay, there's this other place where we can draw truthful information from and maybe leverage it in the same way that we do with packets. Before I get into this too deeply, I kind of want to give some background and context, and so, and maybe I digress a little bit, but our sort of environment started in, our little ecosystem, at least the one Wireshark is part of, started in the late 80s. There was a group of people at the Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, led by Van Jacobson, who actually spoke at SharkFest a few years ago. He's a really cool guy. But they were working, if I recall the story correctly, maybe some of the people who know the history better can correct me, but as I recall, they were working on a problem that the entire internet was having. The internet was suffering from something called congestion collapse, and they were kind of working on getting that problem identified and solved, and they ended up, as a side effect of that, developing libpcap and TCP dump. And Steve McCann, who was part of that team, he wrote a bunch of that code, but he also developed BPF, which is the filtering language that we all know and love today. But the cool thing they did was release that as open source. And I remember when I was first starting out in my career, I was on these different Unix systems running TCP dump. That was the common thing. I got my start shortly after that in the early 90s. But the fact that they released it as open source allowed for this really cool thing to happen, which was that other people saw that you had this packet capture library, and they developed all these tools. If you look on the timeline where I say something in the water, I didn't want to clutter out the slide too much, but I could shove a whole bunch of product logos in that little space between 1988 and 1998, because that's where a lot of these tools started popping up, including Ethereal, which is something I started working on in 1997, and I did the first release publicly in 1998. And initially, I was kind of pathologically blind to the fact that people used Windows for useful work. So I only released it for Linux and Solaris because those were the operating systems we used at work. And I was happy with that. I would have been perfectly content with just this tool that ran on the Unix. But at around that same time, there were a couple of grad students, Lori Stagiani, whose name is going to pop up a couple of times here, and Gianluca Vereni, who were developing something called WinPCap. And it was a packet capture library they built from scratch, but it had a compatibility mode for libpcap, meaning that one of our developers, not me, like I said, noticed that WinPCap was there and said, hey, we could adapt Ethereal to run on Windows. And they did. And suddenly we had this huge user community. And so, Wireshark wouldn't be where it is without WinPCap, it's fair to say. So our community grew over the next few years. Loris went on to found a company called Case Technologies here in the U.S. and brought Gianluca with him. And about a year after that was founded, I joined Case Technologies, and that's when Ethereal became Wireshark, because trademark law exists, and my former employer had the trademark for Ethereal, and so live and learn. We had to change the name, and so that's why we have a shark fin instead of this big E logo. But once I went over to Case, we started developing all these products that complemented Wireshark, and things worked really well. We hired this person named Janice, you may know her, who had the idea. We hired her as a business development manager, and she had this idea of starting up a conference. And that's what we started in 2008, and that's how you got SharkFest. So that was a successful thing we did. A couple of years later, this company called Riverbed, maybe you saw their banner out there, noticed what we were doing and acquired us. And the cool thing about Riverbed is that Riverbed was founded by Steve McCann, who wrote BPF. And so at that point in 2010, you had Steve McCann, the guy behind BPF and libpcap and TCP dump. You had Loris Dejwani, who is behind WinPCAP, and myself all working at the same company, which is really cool. When I was developing this slide, it made me realize that I have been very fortunate in my career in that I've had a strong professional network, and that's reflecting on that. I kind of hope that SharkFest kind of contributes to that for all of you. But anyway, Steve and Loris and I kind of had the opportunity to work together for a little while, but that didn't last too long. Steve and Loris left to form other companies, but Loris went on to develop an open source tool called Sysdig. It behaves very much like TCP/dump, but going back to the system calls, it looks at system calls instead of network packets. And he started up a company around that. It eventually became named Sysdig. They also developed another open source tool called Falco, which acts a lot like an IDS. It monitors the system calls that happen on a system and will, match them against rules and alert you and things like that. So this is kind of why, we ended up at system calls. And I joined Sysdig a couple of years ago, and so that's what I've been spending part of my time on. If you're not familiar with system calls, and this is a very overly simplistic slide. I'm sure there are going to be people at lunch saying, well, actually, it works like this, and that's true. But just to give you a quick overview of how system calls, if you're not familiar with that kind of area of computing, system calls are this programming layer that an operating system exposes to the programs that run on the system. For instance, if I want to read a file, whether it's in a program I wrote or in Wireshark or whatever, typically what will happen is that program will end up calling open followed by read, and you read all the data, and then close to close the file handle. And it's very kind of simple and straightforward. But the thing to pay attention to here is that if you want to do anything useful on your operating system, you have to go through this system call layer. And if you want to talk to the hardware, if you want to connect to the network, if you want to draw on the screen, play audio, do whatever, you have to go through the system call interface. And this is what these system calls look like on Linux and Mac OS. On Windows, they look a little bit differently. The names kind of begin with NT, and they behave similarly enough to be useful and differently enough to get you into a lot of trouble sometimes, but still, you're going through this system call layer. So, just to let you know that, the mechanism is still there. It's just slightly different. But over on the system side, we've gone from a situation years ago, where the phrase LAMP stack was really popular about, 15 years ago? But LAMP stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And that's what a lot of web applications ran on. And if you look at this environment, if you can tap into that system call layer, you suddenly have great insight into what this service environment's doing. And if you are running it on a desktop system, you can see what your desktop's doing. But today I'm going to focus on the server side. But we've evolved from this old classic LAMP stack. There's nothing wrong with running a LAMP stack today if that does the job for you. But nowadays people run containerized environments, whether it's Docker or Kubernetes or whatever, Podman or any of the other products that do containers. If you're not familiar with containers, they're a way of taking either a single process or a group of processes and making them think that they have their own operating system. You can partition off these processes into their own it's not a VM, but it's just this fake system. And this is very popular nowadays. You have Kubernetes clusters running with, I'd have to ask one of my coworkers, but I don't know how many processes you'd have running on these systems. And if you hop onto a modern Linux system and run, the PS command, you'll see dozens or hundreds of processes. And when you see that, you realize that, you have, it's time for me to run around. You have this layer where all these things are doing something useful. And let me run over to this side. You have this complex system up here doing something useful, and then you have a layer underneath that everything, in order to do something useful, has to access, and you realize, well, that's a shared medium, kind of like a network segment. I mean, it's not like it's not a network, but it's, you have those characteristics where in order to do something useful, you have to go through this, single thing. And if you can tap into that, you can see deeply into how the system is working and get good insights into that and characterize, whether it's, doing well performance-wise, or is something, something's doing something it shouldn't, maybe somebody's in there, stealing your data or what have you. So earlier I mentioned Laura Stagiani founding, Sysdig and writing the tool Sysdig. That's kind of the goal with these tools, to give you insights into what a system might be doing. And so, if you look at Sysdig and Falco right now, they're architected this way. You have something very similar to that, TCP dump and libpcap ecosystem, where you have a common open source library that will capture system calls off a system. It does that through either a kernel module or an ePBF probe. You can see on the bottom. The library that does that is called libscap. It stands for Library for System Capture. It then passes data on to another library called libsimps, Library for System Inspection, and it adds enrich data, things like it'll attach usernames to user IDs and process names to process IDs and so on, file paths to file descriptors. And then Sysdig and Falco utilize these libraries to do their job. So everything that happens on the system can be observed this way. And not only can system calls be observed, libscap has a plugin architecture, and you can pull in logs from AWS CloudTrail. I don't know if you have anything running up at AWS, but there's this service, if you're familiar with AWS, there are dozens of services, and people have jobs where they need to keep all these services memorized so they know what they can do at AWS. But they have a service called CloudTrail, which will log everything that's happening at that SaaS layer, and you can get a good hand. If you have this huge complex AWS environment, you can use CloudTrail to get a handle on that. And libscap has a plugin which will let you pull in CloudTrail logs. I'm bringing this up because tonight at the treasure hunt, you will need to know this. But there are also plugins like Kubernetes Audit, and I can't remember all the other different plugins that we have now. But if you look at the at the very top of the slide where we have Falco and Sysdig, you have a command line tool that lets you see get text output of what's happening in our system. You have this continuously run monitoring tool that will gather information, match it against the rules, and alert you on certain events. But you don't have a desktop analyzer. And when Laura asked me to come join Sysdig, that's the kind of hole in that product line that he asked me to fill. And so that's what I've been working on the last couple of years. I have been working on an application which is currently called Logray. It's gone through a couple of renames, and it might go through a couple more, you never know. But it's, as you can see from the logo, it's a ray. Rays are cousins to sharks. You should, kind of be clicking into this now. But it shares a lot of the same code with Wireshark, but it focuses on system calls and logs, and you can do kind of deep level interactive desktop analysis of that. Now it's time for a demo. As the disclaimer on the slide says, this may contain traces of danger and stupidity. And that's just because I have a bad habit when I'm giving demos, in that I always use a fresh build of Wireshark, or in this case Logray, off of our master source code branch, and that means it might crash, it might erase my hard drive, and let's have fun and find out. So I'm wearing the wrong glasses here, but we'll get through this. So this is Logray. It should look very familiar, but it's a little bit different. You have a list of capture files, and they are capture files. Up at the top that I've opened recently, there's an interface down there that We don't yet support live system calls on Mac OS, but we do support CloudTrail, so that's why you see the CloudTrail plugin. And again, that was kind of the first thing I worked on. But if I open up a file, if you look up at the top, there's it's not a packet list, and it's an event list. And there aren't source and destination columns or protocol columns. There's a column called event name, and that's, in this case, a list of system calls. And there are little up and down arrows under the direction column. That, in this case, indicates the fact that you're entering a system call and exiting a system call. And we make a distinction there and measure the difference so that you can see if a system call took a very long time. Like sometimes if you're reading from a file, especially a really slow network share, that might take an unusually long amount of time, and you can see that here. There's a read-write column, which I'll scroll down to in a little bit, that shows you when you do either reads or writes from, through an I/O service. And the very first, this is a very simple capture. I captured myself running curl on a Linux box, and that's all we have here. So we only have one process and one user, so it's overly simplistic. But lets me scroll through this pretty quickly. But if I go down here to process information, I can see, I ran curl, and I ran it under bash, and I said to go to the Wireshark download page, which is probably not the most useful thing for curl, but that's what I did that day. And you can see all sorts of other information that that libscap and libsimps give you. You can see process ancestors. So I can see that not only did I run this under bash, I ran it on an LXQT Linux system, and you can see all the ancestors all the way down to systemd, which is on most Linux systems the topmost process that spawns everything else. If I scroll down the event list down to event number 591, I can see that under the RW column, I can see that I read a file. If I go down to the file descriptor information, I can see, okay, I ran curl. The first thing curl does on a Linux system is load the curl library, and that's what happened here. And the cool thing, the thing I think is cool, is if you go down to the very bottom in the detail view, you can see executable and linkable format. Do you know what that is? Anybody? It's ELF. ELF is the executable file format that Linux uses and a bunch of other operating systems. And this is not part of this is not part of libscap or libsimps. This is where we kind of pivot over and take advantage of Wireshark, because Wireshark has an ELF dissector. Did you know that? If you have an ELF file that pops up in a packet capture, you can sometimes see that get dissected. In fact, on Linux, you can open Wireshark with Wireshark and see all the ELF data. Let's see how much time we have. I need to move this along, but if I go and close this file, I mentioned that we also handle CloudTrail. Well, this is a CloudTrail log. Oops. And we can see, somebody did something on an EC2 instance here, or an RDS instance, or, elastic load balancing. And, you can see all the events that are happening at that high level in AWS that you kind of get a clue about when you pull up the web console at AWS, but this shows you just all the little plumbing bits that are happening, which is pretty useful. And you can go down and scroll through all that. But going back to that first capture, the up and down arrows symbols that I'm drawing here are a result of a Lua plugin that I wrote. And if you scroll down, I'm just adding up and down arrows to the tree and displaying those in the columns. I just wanted to mention that real quick because I have a slide with a link to the script if you want to play with it. I think that's all I had for the demo. Just like I said, because I'm Of all the speakers here, I am probably the least talented demonstrating Wireshark, which... But no, that speaks to the quality of the speakers that we have. I mean, yeah, I can show off Wireshark, but some of these people, they do this all day long, and so, that's just their forte. It's not mine. So a couple of quick slides about Logray. One is am I screwing up the screen? Okay. Just to manage your expectations. This is a way to grow our ecosystem and actually add a new ecosystem that we can kind of build upon. And it's something that I'm really excited about. This is not a replacement for Wireshark in any way. It's just this new cool thing. It's just another tool that you have in your toolbox that you can access. And maybe if you do talk to the system people where you work, you can say, hey, you can, have you looked at this? You can do this now. And this is just a view into operating systems that we haven't really had before on this level. This is still very rough. There's just, I can guarantee you, if you try this out, you're going to run into bugs. If you do, you're free to file them on our issue tracker, and we'll try to get them sorted out. Finally, this is quite a bit of a blank slate, and that's half happenstance and half intentional. When I was working on it, I referred to it as mitosis because I was taking this huge chunk of code, that was Wireshark and doing this cellular thing where I was splitting it out into two separate entities. And when I did that and was developing the Logray UI, I noticed that under the analysis and statistics menus, there are all these things that had to deal with, these very specific protocols. And in Logray, I stripped all that out because, they're kind of useless in that environment. But that also gives us this nice, clean, empty, greenfield space in which to build out new features. And again, that's something I'm very excited about. I'm anticipating that people are going to go, hey, I need this feature, and then we're going to start filling in those two menus and come up with a pretty cool product. So another question is when? We're thinking about a release this summer, so keep an eye out for that. Technically, you can download it right now off of our automated build server because it's part of our continuous integration system. So you can pull down packages for Windows and Mac OS. Again, we don't have live system call captures on those two systems yet. You'll have to run sysdig on a Linux box and pull that capture over. But yeah, you can try it now if you want. And I'll have a slide at the very end with a link. So time to stop talking about Logray and start talking about Wireshark, which is, I'm sure, what you're all here for. We're also going to have a release this summer based around the next version of Wireshark, the next major version. That might be 4.3 or 4.4. We haven't decided on the numbering yet, but a few quick updates. If you do any sort of Lua scripting, the thing to really pay attention to in this release is that we're bumping our Lua version up to 5.4 on Windows and Mac OS, but we'll also support 5.3. Prior to that, we'd only supported 5.1 and 5.2, and there are enough changes in the language to kind of maybe be aware of that. And so far, we haven't broken anything internally based on that, but yeah, there are a lot of people out there with Lua scripts that we just don't have visibility into. So we're not sure if it's going to break anything or not. The I/O graphs, anything that draws graphs on the screen, most of those dialogues have been improved. Okay. John did most of that work. He, I don't know if you want to expand on that later in a little bit, but that's something to be aware of. You can add more things as custom columns, which is useful. And as part of the work that I did on Logray, I added a feature called automatic profile switching. And this is an example of something good that can come from developing this, because this is kind of a neat cross-pollination thing that happened. If you pull up the profile dialog in the current development builds of Wireshark, you have the option of associating display filters with profiles. So if you are working for the Wayland-Yutani Corporation and then flying to this planet with an alien on it, you can set up an automatic profile so that you can you can set up a display filter such that when you load Wireshark and load a capture, if it matches that display filter within the first, well, by default, 1,000 packets, it'll automatically switch to that profile. This is really useful on the Logray side if you're switching between, say, syscalls and logs, but on the Wireshark side, if you have a client who has a very specialized environment and you have a profile set up for them, you can set up a display filter that matches only that environment, like a DHCP server or something like that, that will automatically switch over to that profile for you. So hopefully that... Okay. Thank you, Betty. This is the slide, or this is kind of the standard slide that I have every keynote, but it's a quick rundown of the vital statistics. I realize you can read, but I'll go through it verbally. We are up to about 1.5 million downloads a month on and to be aware that number comes from the download servers that we manage. I have no clue how many people use Wireshark on Linux, because when you install Wireshark on Linux, you go through your Linux distributions to download facilities, and I just don't have visibility into that. Again, on the servers we manage, most of the downloads we get are for Windows, and we have a good healthy percentage for Mac OS. Wireshark itself, the next release is going to support, we kind of hit a couple of milestones. We're going to support 3,000 protocols and 250,000 display filter fields, which is kind of cool. We have a bunch of authors. The authors stat is one that I like because I like being part of a project that people contribute to, and I feel very fortunate in that we've gotten contributions from so many people. We also have a nice, healthy Discord server with over 4,000 users there. And depending on, people ask how many lines of code Wireshark consists of, and I kind of don't know, because we automatically generate about half our code. So if you count automatically generated code, we're up over 6 million lines, but if you don't, we're down around 3.5. But anyway, we also have a foundation, and this is something we have kind of spun up over the last year or so, and our latest milestone is that we have a technical steering committee for the Wireshark project, and it's now official, meaning that we ratified a charter for the steering committee recently, and this is a big thing for me, because this means that we officially and legally have a group of developers and contributors to the project that are have this direct link to the project and the project's governance. And this is one of the things that this was one of the goals that I had when I was setting up the foundation, that I wanted this group of people to be able to legally step in if I had to step away from the project for any reason. And so this is it's a good thing for the project because we have official governance now, but for me it's a kind of a weight off my shoulders. We also have some sponsors which I'd like to recognize right now. We have 2 platinum members right now, Endace and Live Action, and their contributions help do this. They help run the foundation. They help our outreach programs that we're setting up and all the other initiatives that we have. We have to pay for infrastructure. That's not free, and their contributions basically pay for all that, along with a couple of silver members, VM and PCAP, which I'm very grateful to for their sponsorship. Finally, before we invite the developers up on stage, I would like to point out that if you want to contribute to the foundation, you can. The easiest way is just to go to the donation page and donate. But if you do that, if you set up a recurring donation, that helps us out when it comes time to plan our budget, because we know that we're going to have this stream come in. But much as I think individual contributions are cool, if you can get your employer to kick in, that would be nice as well. We had an issue that somebody filed a few months ago, and they said, this is broken for us, and we have 1,000 users using Wireshark internally, and I'm like, I have never heard any, I've not been contacted you for sponsorship. Why is that? Yeah, if you depend on Wireshark enough that 1,000 people are impacted in their day-to-day work, maybe you should be, coordinating something with us. And if you do think your company might want to donate, I know in the US it's really hard to get corporations to give to open source projects because, we can't write up a contract that, demands net 30 or net 60 or something like that. But there are ways to smooth that process out. And so if you want to talk, probably Sherry would be the best person to talk to, but if you want to do that, that would be much appreciated. Now's the time in the talk when we invite the developers to come up on stage. While they're coming up here, if you have any questions about Logray, I can probably answer one or two. And also, if you have any questions for the developers, maybe be thinking about them. I see a hand up over here. Yes. I personally use Spaces just because there are a couple of programming tools that I use that default to that. But nowadays, what I try to do is use editors that are smart enough to automatically detect that or conform to whatever coding convention people use. If you're going to use tabs, I'm not going to get bent out of shape over that. Okay, there are two questions. One, where the Wireshark name came from, and I'll tackle that first. When I moved to Case Technologies and it became apparent that we just weren't going to get the trademark for Ethereal, I was stressed out. I mean, just the fact that, okay, you can't use this name anymore. Welcome to the life of Prince. But, well, if you want to look up his history, that he had Sony messed him up badly. Anyway, when it became apparent that we had to change the name, we spent probably a good week and a half just coming up with candidate names. And I think it's a dim recollection, but I think Loris was the one who came up with the name Wireshark. Anyway, we had this list. I wrote it down. I showed it to our style consultant, my wife, and she zeroed in on Wireshark. And so you can thank her for that choice. Thank you. The second question had nothing to do with trademarks or logos. It asked how Logray and all the other tools, and Sysdig and Falgo, how they get that system call information. Well, Linux doesn't give that up willingly. Let me put it that way. But there are a couple of methods, and you can choose between them nowadays. There's a kernel module. Since Linux is open source, you can write a kernel module that does anything you want, and that's what I use on my Linux VM. But there's this kernel module called SCAP, SCAP, that will capture that system call information and then bring it up into the library. But there's also an eBPF probe that you can optionally use that will do the same thing. And if you're familiar with eBPF, it's an extension of the Berkeley packet filter system that lets you run BPF code inside the kernel, which sounds really insane, but it actually works pretty well. And so you can pull it in through one of those two methods. But if you have any other Logray questions, it's probably best to take them offline after the talk, because we have... I'll go to the system approach. Yeah. Actually, yeah, I have coworkers here who can answer these questions much better than I can, so they'd be happy to talk to you. Thanks for that. Who has the mic? All right, why don't you know the drill, introduce yourselves.
My name is Anders Broman. I'm used to work for Ericsson, so most of my work has been in the telco sector protocols, but also other stuff. Also in other areas that caught my interest because it's been part of my work and also a part-time hobby. I started to contribute around year 2000 and became a core developer 2003, I think. And it's been a good ride so far.
John Thacker. I used to work at Keysight, and I work at a smaller company called Zeta Associates. I've been using Wireshark for a long time, made some contributions starting probably about 10 years ago, but started making a lot more contributions and became a core developer 2 or 3 years ago at this point. Kind of work on pretty much anything that catches my interest.
I'm Peter from the Netherlands. I started working on Wireshark 10 years ago, quite involved in open source, and Wireshark was just one of the open source projects that caught my attention, had a bug, needs fixing, missing feature, added feature. So I've been working on TLS decryption, a bunch of stuff. Like John said, whatever caught my interest.
My name is Chuck Kraft. Wireshark is a hobby of mine. I answer questions on the Ask website. The last couple of years I did presentations on Lua, and this year a presentation on Mate.
Hello, my name is Jaap. I became involved with Wireshark back when we were first working on voice over IP applications, and you tried to find tools which could support us in that. The tool back then didn't really did what we needed it to do, so I was sending patches to Gerald to put in to improve and correct and whatnot. And eventually he said, you know what, do it yourself. And that was 20 years ago, and I'm still doing it.
Hi, I'm Pascal from France. I've been in the telco industry for 24 years now. Happy ethereal user in the early 2000s. A first-time contributor in 2008, I would say, and a core developer in 2012, I think, because others were just bothered merging my patches and it just gave me...
I'm Sake Blok from the Netherlands also. I started using Ethereal back in back in I think in 99, somewhere like that, and I was using it a lot, and I missed features, so I started developing. First, I want to ask for the development of the feature, and I thought, hey, it's open source, maybe I can do it myself. I'm not a programmer by trade, but I know how to program a little bit. So I've submitted my first patch, and I did it on a Linux, and I was using it on the Windows, so I needed the automated build. So every time I submitted a patch, I would wait patiently for like a couple of hours or a day, then ask, hey, where can you please add it? And after a couple of those changes, they said, oh, here you have write access, you're a core developer now, you can do it yourself. And that's about 2007, and I've been developing for a couple of years. I haven't developed that much lately. I want to, but it's becoming more and more of a real software project, which is not my trade, although it's a little difficult to me. So I do consulting mainly and trainings and stuff like that.
Hi, I'm Roland Knal. Been using Wireshark for quite some time now. Co-developed since 2016, I think. Working for ProfitHub in my professional life, doing a lot of hobby stuff with Wireshark, and mainly nowadays being involved in the marketing side of the project more and more. So my story is the same as most of the guys here. You know, something didn't work. I needed it to work, so I fixed it myself. I've keyed the phrase, we fix the stuff that annoys us. So if you annoy us, we fix the stuff that annoys you. Crude but accurate. But I have a question for you guys. How many of you are first-time users of Wireshark in this year? Don't be shy.
Yeah.
We're not biting. Okay. How many of you are Wireshark users for more than 10 years? Yeah, that's the number. How many of you on a daily basis, when you use Wireshark, stumble across a feature that annoys the heck out of you? So why don't you fix it? No, to be honest, there are multiple ways to contribute to the project. If you're a first-time user, actually your contribution might be more valuable than you might think, because you have fresh eyes coming to the project. You see stuff the avid users don't see anymore. So if you stumble across something that annoys you, go on Discord, go on all the other sites and say, hey, is this really how it should be? Most of the time, Peter or John will say, no, we fix it for you. But maybe once in a while you stumble across something you can fix as well. And for those things, we do have a bug list entry on GitLab, where you can file your own bugs. It doesn't hurt. It's not hard. If you have things that bug you, please send us bug reports. Please get in contact with us. 4,000 users on Discord is a huge number, but at the same time, if you don't interact with us, we cannot fix the stuff that annoys you. So please do that. Yeah, and that's all I had.
Well, I already have a mic. So.
Oh, you have?
Yeah. It's on even. I'm Gerald. I started the project a long time ago.
You guys have any questions? Anyone has a question? I mean, if you search us out, we're the ones with the red badges.
And we will be hanging out in the developer den usually.
Yeah.
Yep.
There's a question.
Was there any sessions where you what's our next through the why had what that.
Okay, so the question was, do we hold any sessions where we walk somebody through the architecture of changing Wireshark and stuff like that? No, not to my recollection. But
no, we've had introductory developer classes in the past. We just
hugely popular.
Yeah, the developer usually does those. Is not here this time around. So,
Jaap has one.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm having a session Wednesday afternoon, going into some of the details which dissector developers are interested in. I'm mainly going to be focusing on dissector writers in C, but if you happen to write in Lua, which I don't, that still can be valuable information in there. So it focuses primarily on the dissector part. There are many more parts to Wireshark than the dissection engine, but that's what we're going to be focusing on. So yeah, that's about it.
And we do have a developer's guide with step-by-step instructions on getting an environment set up on Windows and Mac OS and Linux.
And we have a Discord.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're in the developer den. If you want to set it up on your PC, laptop, we're happy to oblige. So the question was, did we look at performance impact when capturing versus not capturing? There are two roads to the answer to that one. One is the hobbyist answer. Yes, there is a performance impact on various systems, and it very much makes a difference on which system you're capturing. So some systems are worse, Windows, than others. But that has more also to do with the architecture those systems apply than with pure technicality. It is true as long as you are on a system which has very low interactions between the network stack and the actual NIC, you get better results. Linux, Mac OS are better suited for that in that regard than Windows is. But if you're looking for the question of doing application development, now this is the professional speaking, doing application development or doing larger development, capturing for analysis on your own PC without specialized hardware is a very bad idea. That has nothing to do with me wanting to sell products. It has something to do with that you are not guaranteed to see the same information that comes in through the line.
Yeah.
Delays are introduced, packets are dropped, information is gobbled. There is a lot of stuff going on, and just the FCS checksum being the prime example is never shown on a capture when you do it on the PC, on the same PC you receive the packet. So for professionalism, I would really apply specialized hardware. For hobbyists, a Linux PC that's fine.
I was going to say another consideration is that sometimes applications behave differently if they notice Wireshark in the process list. We've run into that before. Sometimes, like games do this. If they see Wireshark, they think you're cheating somehow. We had one bug report. Somebody said every time I open Wireshark, it immediately closes, and we couldn't replicate it. And it came down to the fact that he was running a security suite that thought Wireshark was a keylogger, and so because we can capture USB. I mean, theoretically, yes, Wireshark can capture keystrokes on your system if you have it open on your USB interface or a Bluetooth interface, but that's not the goal. I mean, but anyway, the authors of this security suite thought that if you're running Wireshark, something bad is happening, and so we're going to kill that process. Thanks, guys.
I don't really agree. Well, okay. Roland has a point that depend on use case, you should use like custom hardware. But I think like for me, usually I work on the application side. So even if there's like a couple of milliseconds extra on whatever TCP or so on, don't really matter. Especially if like local traffic, the convenience of being able to capture traffic and study it locally, that like saving the developer time or saving the user time, it's so much more like important, I think, than walking to the closet, grabbing some special hardware out, and trying to set it up.
Yeah.
And if you use Google, I think you'd find 10, 20, 30 different university papers on different aspects of packet capturing. So it depends on your use case, as always.
And to add one thing to that mix, you started with the packets don't lie, but if you're capturing inside your system, the packets are not exactly the same as outside your system because there's processing for the ingress packets before it hits the capturing library.
Yeah.
And also from the egress packets, there's still some processing before it hits the network. So the packets will lie if you capture in your own system, or at least lie a little bit.
A question we get sometimes is, I'm capturing on the system and I'm seeing 60,000 byte packets. How is that even possible? And what's happening is, you're running on a VM, and the network driver in that VM is coalescing all those packets into a single one that the application then sees. And so the packets aren't necessarily lying. You're just seeing, truth in one place is not the same as the truth in a different place.
So having a good demarcation point outside your system, in my daily work, is very important. Yeah.
You're seeing an interpreted view of the network, I think, is a right sentence to that. But anyway, I was talking to one of you about, for instance, industrial machine applications where the point of capture is more important than how you capture, because the point of capture will tell you what you see. And if you use the wrong port, you will purely miss out hundreds of packages, which has nothing to do with the system you're using. It's just you're using the wrong system the wrong entry point. So the question how to capture correctly could in itself be answered throughout a day, and we still would have been left with open questions. In general, a rule of thumb is just, if you do it for a professional reason, if you do it for troubleshooting and you are not able to apply specialized hardware, avoid Windows. Not because I'm dishing on Windows. Well, I would personally, but that's not the case in this case. Avoid Windows, and if you do it professionally, if you work for a company, those systems are not that expensive. Try to invest a little bit to get a tab or some other professional hardware to do it properly.
It's time to wrap up. So if you have any other questions, we will be around, and the developer din's probably the first good place to check to see if any of the developers are hanging around if you have any questions. But we'll be around in general. All right, just... And I did want to finish up by saying thank you. I know I say this every time, but I truly believe that Wireshark is a great and wonderful thing, and it's not because of me. It's because of all of you, because of the developers and educators and users and sponsors and everybody else who contributes to this project. And I love the work that I do, and it's because of you, and I'm very thankful for that. Thank you.